thank you all for attending the 11th annual meeting of FMMA. Many of you traveled great distances to be here, and your attendance is much appreciated. Allow me to recognize those without whom this gathering would be an impossibility. Many thanks to the staff here at the Omni who have set the bar for all other conference hosts. Thank you, people at Omni. Thanks to Lynn Ann Henderson and the rest of the Connections team, whose conference and party planning expertise has been on display with this organization for many years. Thanks to my wife, Darla, and to Jay and Kelly Kempton, the four of us are ultimately responsible for this meeting and drive its theme and content. Finally, if you are a sponsor in the room, please stand. Thank you. Without you, there would be no meeting. All of you, please be sure to take time to visit the displays and the booths, remembering these are not the usual sponsors at a medical meeting. These folks have withstood our pillars, the demands our organization imposes on vendors, demands under which the vast majority of industry vendors would stagger and fall. This year's theme, while based on Parker Brothers' game Monopoly, is unfortunately a real-life, very hazardous, and even deadly game in our industry. Yesterday, Dr. Phil Eskew explored the perils of breaking the rules of the game, particularly for DPC practices dealing with ERISA-governed health plans. Later this morning, we'll hear Dr. Norman Imes explain that if a government monopoly is playing the game and not winning, they simply change the rules. This conference could have been subtitled New Game, New Rules, as members of this association have chosen to purchase value and provide value, contrary to the usual game players. We should not discount the extent to which this is David and Goliath stuff, and I'll finish today with some thoughts on what I think winning the game actually looks like. What is it about real-life monopoly that we all find so bothersome? Monopolies or near monopolies suggest that the choices available to consumers are limited, don't they? What if all consumers choose to buy from one and only one firm? As long as this choice to patronize a single vendor or firm is voluntary, none of us would object. Our objection arises when choice limitation is forced upon us. One evening, I asked Jim Epstein, Reason Magazine's journalistic genius, how he identified a potentially juicy story. Without hesitation, he said, industry consolidation. He said the natural order of things was for the number of competitors in any industry to increase, and that any decrease in number was suspicious. Jim said industry consolidation invariably has the fingerprints of government, bribery, and corruption all over it. He recognized that the medical industrial complex was full of juicy stories as monopolies or near monopolies imposed on consumers have been commonplace and routine. What is the definition of monopoly? Quoting Murray Rothbard, monopoly has meant from the 17th century on a grant of exclusive privilege by the government. It means exclusively either one person or one firm or several firms. So, for example, the King of England gave to John Smith the monopoly of production of all playing cards in the Kingdom of England. Anybody else who produced these playing cards was shot. The East India Company was given a monopoly on the sale of tea in the American colonies, the revolt against which turned the Boston Harbor into tea. Rothbard's definition is extremely important to understand as it illustrates the futility of expecting the government to protect us from monopolies, as governments are the ones who actually grant them. How do governments grant monopolies? They do so in two ways. The most obvious but less common method is to openly and officially grant monopoly privileges to one or more firms, as I've mentioned, making it illegal for anyone else to operate a competing business. Here in Oklahoma, for example, Only 2 wholesalers are allowed to distribute wine and spirits in the state. And if they don't distribute what you want, you can't buy it here in Oklahoma. No other wholesalers are allowed. The second way governments grant monopolies is less obvious but much more common, inflicting regulations on the industry endurable only by the biggest and most established businesses regulated. One form this can take is the denial of a permission slip to would-be competitors, such as certificates of need or licenses of all kinds. The city of Edmond, where I live, once wrongly denied a building permit to a physician who wanted to build a hospital in town. An undisclosed settlement agreement with that physician was the result when angry residents pointed out that members of the city council who denied the permit were paid board members of the local hospital. There are 2 types of monopoly. The first type is those where the state has granted privileges to individuals or firms, as we've already discussed. The second type is those where the state has granted the privilege to themselves, making government the monopolist. Let's examine some examples of each. Obamacare. Obamacare is an example of a state grant of monopoly privileges to others. And while most don't think of this as a monopoly, I think it fits Rothbard's definition and certainly qualifies if you consider the backstory. Larry Van Horn was full of surprises when Darla and I attended his first annual Price Transparency Summit. The first surprise was the wide and varied cast of characters he'd drawn, and the second was the presentation of this award by him and none other than Bill Frist, founder of HCA. The third surprise was when several of the industry insiders present at the gathering opened up to me about how the industry came around to support Obamacare. That they opened up to me was astonishing. What they told me was just as jaw-dropping as the leaked video of Jonathan Gruber, Obamacare architect, telling an audience that the stupidity of the average American was a key factor in the law's passage. Initially, I was told all of the old guard stood in opposition to Obamacare, the American Hospital Association, Big Pharma, and the large insurers. These parties and more were all present together at a meeting with administration officials who listened to and took note of their concerns and the resistance to the bill's passage. The next day, the same group assembled, only the American Hospital Association was absent. The next day, the pharma reps were gone, no longer present to register any further objections. On and on until not even the insurance carriers were left at the objection table. One by one, their presence at the objection table diminished until there was no one left. How did this happen? The administration asked what everyone wanted, and then they gave it to them. The American Hospital Association, they wanted a ban on physician-owned facilities. What were they granted? Not only a ban on new physician-owned facilities, but a ban on the expansion of those already in operation. The administration told pharma that they thought their days of making big money on regular pharmaceutical drugs were numbered, as so many of their cash cows had generic availability. The administration correctly surmised the big profits for pharma would likely come from biologic drugs for the foreseeable future and offered them a ban on any competition from foreign countries. Pharma, like the hospitals, agreed not only to withdraw their opposition to Obamacare, but to support it. The administration promised a 20-year ban on foreign biologic drugs, and the next day, the FDA declared foreign biologic drugs unsafe. The insurers conjured up the medical loss ratio, which they knew would crush all but 4 or 5 of their competitors. They too withdrew their opposition and offered their support when the administration implemented not only the medical loss ratio, but configured the program in a way that the government essentially guaranteed payment of the premiums the carriers wanted. The insurers were probably the most enthusiastic supporters, as they were also extended the gift of giant deductible offerings and also the opportunity to operate the scam that we all now call Medicare Advantage plans. The AMA knew better than to object to Obamacare, as they might place their cozy codebook deal in jeopardy. Publicly, the AMA promised to respond to the physician outcry, but they never assumed a serious position at the opposition table. I therefore believe that Obamacare satisfies our monopoly definition as government grants or privileges bestowed on a select few. In an Orwellian public display, Barack Obama recently celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the Affordable Care Act, legislation that can only be described as the result of an orgy of backroom deals. Some of you are likely aware that the federal government awarded a monopoly contract to the American Medical Association to print and license their CPT codebooks in the early 1990s. The many millions of dollars in revenue this has generated for the AMA each year accounts for about 80% of their annual revenue. Think of the CPT codebook monopoly as the little blue pill Uncle Sam gave to the AMA. 20% or less of their revenue comes from physician dues. I don't even know anyone that belongs to the organization. The AMA, however, has continued to pose as a representative voice for physicians in this country. What many of you here are not aware of is that a fearless Oklahoma City dermatologist sued Donna Shalala and the federal government for awarding this monopoly contract to the AMA. While my friend Melissa Clements lost her case at the lower court and again at appeal, this cozy arrangement between the AMA and his sugar daddy, Uncle Sam, is now receiving the scrutiny that it deserves and has a chance of bringing a delayed victory to Dr. Clements and her dermatologist colleagues who so heroically fought this grant of privilege to the AMA. Uncle Sam knew that this monopoly contract was essentially a purchase of the AMA. Once bought, the AMA is predictably served as Uncle Sam's concubine, supporting imposition of the resource-based relative value scale, the Clinton healthcare plan, mandatory electronic health records, Obamacare, and more, including the most authoritarian and inexcusable features of the COVID crackdown. The high rise in real estate the AMA's Chicago building occupies belongs with Park Place and Boardwalk on our Monopoly game board. If you find yourself on Wabash Avenue in Chicago, you'll have no trouble locating the skyscraper that they occupy, the one that their monopoly built. I always return their solicitations for all of the revenue-generating side hustles they sponsor, so they'll have to shoulder the postage. One thing you may not know about the AMA is the role they played in the closure of many medical schools in the United States. In 1904, at the suggestion of the AMA's newly created Council on Medical Education, the Carnegie Foundation funded what we now know as the Flexner Report. This astonishing report claimed that too many physicians were being trained, and although Abraham Flexner was not a physician, it imposed a regimented curriculum on the nation's medical schools, which ultimately resulted in the closure of many medical schools that were training physicians. Implementation of the Flexner Report's recommendations, all under the oversight of the AMA, just preceded the outbreak of the Great Influenza, often referred to as the Spanish flu, and the most deadly epidemic in history. There is no doubt that the death toll in this country, almost 1 million lives, was partly due to the severe shortage of physicians available, a direct result of the AMA's efforts to limit the supply. Hiding behind a cloak of higher standards, the AMA got the restriction of competition that they desired from the Flexner Report, but at a cost of a great many lives. The suffering and death that have resulted from monopoly privileges granted to individuals like the AMA and the players in Obamacare, pales, however, in comparison to the carnage that results from when government grants monopoly privileges to themselves. Because there are so many examples of government monopolies that have caused truly astonishing harm and death, I can only scratch the surface of this topic in my remarks. The National Health Service in Great Britain is as good a place to start as any. Familiarize yourself, if you dare, with the Liverpool care pathway, and you'll understand the murderous nature of the British National Health Service. In short, this pathway is the slow death imposed on patients which combines the denial of food and water with the administration of sedatives. Primary care physicians are paid a bounty for every one of their patients they can convince to consent to this slow death euthanasia. As you can imagine, some patients change their mind as they become thirsty, and a good number have challenged that they ever granted their consent. In these cases, family members, barred from providing them food or water, have resorted to sending flowers to their loved ones so they can drink the water from the flower vases. The sacrifice of the individual for the greater good is on full display in the National Health Service, as many Britons are actually proud to sacrifice their lives in order to relieve the system of their continued existence. There are private alternatives to the National Health Service available in Great Britain, so the NHS isn't truly a monopolized system. This is true for many government monopolies, which are actually propped up by private alternatives that relieve the system of the inefficiencies and inadequacies that would otherwise cause riots. That we regularly see Canadians at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma should be all you need to know about the ability of the Canadian system to meet the needs of their citizen patients and the feasibility of Medicare for all schemes in this country. The near monopoly in Great Britain is a disaster. Canada, more tightly controlled by the government, is much worse. The wait lines for care in Canada are so dire now that euthanasia, the only escape from the misery of waiting in line for many, is the sixth leading cause of death there. While the British and Canadians are paradoxically proud of their failed socialist health systems, the Canadians are really proud. Rick Baker, my Canadian friend who will speak tomorrow, tells the joke about how no Canadian is truly happy unless they're waiting in line. I used to think the love affair Canadians had with their obviously failed system was an example of Stockholm Syndrome, not unlike when the prisoner develops an affectionate feeling for their cruel jailer when the jailer extends a rare kindness to the prisoner. I now think about this differently because the more cruelly the Canadians are abused or neglected by their system, the more they love and defend it. 3 to 5 year wait times just to see a surgeon who will then attempt to schedule a procedure are commonplace now. A young rock climber in his 20s, hobbled by a loose body in his ankle joint, was told he'd wait 5 years for an ankle arthroscopy. Timely Medical Alternatives, Rick Baker's company, got that patient and Surgery Center of Oklahoma connected. He had his surgery the next week and was back in Vancouver the next day. The most extreme example of care denial I've seen from Canada was earlier this year when an 84-year-old woman with a debilitating rectocele was told she would wait 5 years for a repair. A severe rectocele, like this woman had, is a condition that, let's just say, requires a lot of work and effort to put things back where they belong after a bowel movement. Her procedure took 30 minutes, cost $4,100, and she was back in Canada the next day. Empathizing with Canadians about how their system has failed them is a conversation I've learned not to have. The worse they've been treated or denied, the stronger the defense they'll present. The cash price care available to Canadians here in the United States is the backup plan for the millions who've chosen to skip the lines. I'll skip over the U.S. Postal Service monopoly because, as far as I know, it's not responsible for much death unless someone there goes postal. How about the National Weather Service? You probably didn't see this one coming. You are all probably aware you are now in tornado country, where some of the most experienced television meteorologists in the country work. Briefly, if Channel 9's David Payne or Lacey Swope or Channel 4's Mike Morgan says there's a tornado, you better take cover. Oklahomans have learned that it doesn't matter what the National Weather Service says. Their sirens often blow unnecessarily or sound off after a storm has passed. Once again, a private, not public weather service is what helps keep Oklahomans out of harm's way. The extent to which the National Weather Service has blood on its hands can be found in this book, Isaac Storm. This is the story of the deadly Galveston hurricane and the deliberate withholding of a life-saving forecast by the newly formed National Weather Service. A conservative guess is that 70,000 people perished unnecessarily in this hurricane. It turns out that a group of Cuban priests had become particularly skilled at predicting the course hurricanes would take as early as the mid-1800s, not wanting their newly formed National Weather Service to be embarrassed by forfeiting any claim of forecasting expertise to someone else. The National Weather Service withheld the warnings they knew to be valid. The frantic Cubans began sending frequent telegram warnings to the United States as they recognized the unusual course this particular hurricane was taking and that Galveston was in its direct path. What did the National Weather Service and the United States government do? They terminated all telegraph communication with Cuba to deny newspapers or anyone else an opportunity to warn or plan. What happened to the man in charge, Eric Klein? He was promoted, of course, given a commendation, and then he quietly retired. Those who managed to escape drowning by climbing high into Galveston trees perished nonetheless from the poisonous snake bites sustained there, where the snakes, also not wanting to drown, gathered. How about the CDC? Rewarding the leaders of the CDC with cozy and high-paying industry jobs for the favoritism shown their future employers has become so commonplace at the CDC that revolving door is now a frequently used phrase to describe how they do business. There is simply no time to adequately explore the damage they do, in particular the damage they did in their role in the COVID authoritarianism that we all endured. How about the NIH? Several years ago, LA Times investigative journalist David Willman produced a 10-part series on pharmaceutical kickbacks NIH scientists received for the favorable treatment granted drugs under their investigation. The NIH admitted this was true and said they would stop. They didn't. When Congress followed up with threats, the NIH instituted an internal policy prohibiting kickbacks if the scientist's salary was it prohibited kickbacks if their salary was more than $150,000 a year. Almost all of the scientists requested and received salary cuts to $149,000 so that they could continue to receive the much more lucrative kickbacks for falsely claiming that many of these investigative drugs were safe. David Willman's 10-part series on the NIH corruption is an astonishing feat of heroic journalism exposing this government monopoly's unapologetic corruption. How about the FDA's monopoly? Remember the food pyramid? In Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us, Michael Moss painstakingly describes in great detail how the food giants colluded with the FDA to promote the processed high-carbohydrate foods that have killed countless Americans. I believe that until the FDA admits their role in this disaster, no nutritional advice from them should be taken seriously. The American Heart Association got in on this action as well, peddling their heart-healthy diet we now know to be a farce, but a scheme which generated millions of dollars for the American Heart Association. Dr. Robert Higgs' study of the Food and Drug Administration and its testing requirements has revealed that this monopoly agency's treatment of drug safety and efficacy has likely resulted in the loss of countless lives, easily numbering over 1 million for just one type of drug. He describes the two types of errors that are made at the FDA when evaluating new drugs. Type 1 errors are when the FDA denies or delays a drug unnecessarily that would have been useful in preventing death or misery. Type 2 errors are when a drug is mistakenly approved. Bureaucrats don't lose their jobs for type 1 errors, but they do for type 2 errors. Hence, the bias is to deny and delay all new drugs, making them unavailable for those who need them. This increased the costs of bringing a new drug to market, severely stifling innovation in the industry. An example of a type 1 error where a drug was mistakenly denied authorization involves the denial of beta blockers to Americans that were in widespread use in Europe and with a proven safety track record. A University of Rochester study showed that for the 10 years that alpranolol was denied Americans, at least 10,000 individuals died annually as a result. That's right, 1 million individuals died unnecessarily in a 10-year period due to refusal to authorize beta blockers in the United States by the FDA. Remember, this is just one drug that falls under the type 1 error category. This is clearly an agency with more blood on its hand than, as Dr. Higgs points out, the combined death toll of the Korean and Vietnam Wars combined. Higgs has pointed out the risk we all take by the FDA's denial of drugs essentially purchases an insurance policy to protect the bureaucrat's job. They protect themselves by denying us. You should know ECRI, which Dr. Goldfarb yesterday pointed out is in Philadelphia. I didn't know that. ECRI is a private firm, and they perform almost all of the functions of the corrupt FDA. The FDA, I'd also need to mention, is now extensively funded by the fees paid to them by the companies that they supposedly regulate. Unlike the FDA, all employees at ECRI are prohibited from owning or investing in directly or indirectly any of the drugs or devices they monitor. We should remember John Barry's axiom, politics plus science equals politics. Where's the Federal Trade Commission? Isn't the function of the FTC to protect us from monopolies, to break them up? Once you understand that the government is highly unlikely to attack the very monopolies they have created or sanctioned, you might think the FTC has no purpose. You would be mistaken. The history of the FTC clearly shows this organization was created to protect the monopolies that were already in place. Butler Schaefer documents in his book, In Restraint of Trade, that the monopolies in existence during and subsequent to World War I begged for the government to form the FTC to declare and enforce fair trade rules which protected them from new innovative competitors. Where is the FTC when a large carrier buys a large pharmacy chain? Where's the FTC when hospital systems merge to completely capture the market share of a geographical area? They are nowhere to be found and should not be relied on to do anything but that which they were designed to do, protect the big industry players while cloaked as champions of the underdog. How do we battle the monopoly and the cartel? How can any success we achieve be measured along the way? It is important to remember we will never convince the majority to share our views of medical freedom in an industry governed by market discipline. It is also important to remember that we don't have to. All that is required is a small group dedicated to the message and the mission and emboldened by the resistance encountered. Look around. You and the person sitting next to you likely fit this description. You are what many have described as a remnant. Albert J. Nock popularized the concept of the remnant, a group that always searched for knowledge on their own. Two things were true about the remnant, he said. They were present, even if you could not identify them, and they would find you. Let's face it, part of the reason we're here and we keep coming back to this meeting is because assurances that we are not alone, and we find that invigorating and inspirational. We are here indeed, and we have found each other. And while our small group, this remnant, can point to many victories, our success should not be measured in the number of converts achieved, but rather should be measured by our faithfulness and dedication to the idea of a medical free market. What is our job then? What are we supposed to do? Ryan McMakin, executive editor at the Mises Institute, recently wrote this: if some people believe that freedom and capitalism are still of value, it's because some fought to preserve those ideas and make them available and attractive to others. Without the preservation of these ideas, the West would have slipped back into a despotism reminiscent of the ancient world long ago. So what can we do ourselves to keep these ideas alive? The truth is, we can only do a small part. After all, Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard did not personally engage each and every person influenced by their ideas. Mises and Rothbard did not have the opportunity to broadcast their ideas straight into the minds of millions of other human beings. No, the works of the great scholars of freedom spread through the works of others. These ideas spread through publishers and editors and through every person who showed a book to a friend or shared a video with a family member. We do what we can, but we still always ultimately rely on others to play their own part as well. Indeed, this process is the same as the process of perpetuating civilization itself. The ideas of great cultural projects like Christendom must be tended and cared for. In this, the ideas are like a campfire to which fuel must be added and which must be watched over, or else the flame fails and much is lost. The mention of the remnant may sound familiar to those of you familiar with the book of Isaiah. Albert J. Nock, who at one time was an Episcopalian priest, gives this hilarious rendition of the book of Isaiah. In the year of Uzziah's death, the Lord commissioned the prophet to go out and warn the people of the wrath to come. Tell them what a worthless lot they are, he said. Tell them what is wrong and why, and what is going to happen unless they have a change of heart and straighten up. Don't mince matters. Make it clear they are positively down to their last chance. Give it to them good and hard, and keep on giving it to them. I suppose perhaps I ought to tell you, Isaiah, that it won't do any good. The official class and their intelligentsia will turn up their noses at you, and the masses will not even listen. They will all keep on in their own ways until they carry everything down to destruction, and you will probably be lucky if you get out with your own life. Isaiah had been very willing to take on the job. In fact, he had asked for it. But the prospect put a new face on the situation. It raised the obvious question, why, if all that were so, if the enterprise were to be a failure from the start, was there any sense in starting it? Ah, the Lord said, you do not get the point. There is a remnant there that you know nothing about. They are obscure, unorganized, inarticulate, each one rubbing along as best he can. They need to be encouraged and braced up because when everything has gone completely to the dogs, they are the ones who will come back and build up a new society. And meanwhile, your preaching will reassure them and keep them hanging on. Your job is to take care of the remnant, so be off now and set about it. I would argue that, like the prophet Isaiah, we measure our success, as I've mentioned, not in terms of the number of converts, but rather in our unflagging dedication to our principles and mission, knowing that while we might not recognize the remnant among us, we must know they are among us and strive continually to reach them. With this as a measure of our success, I'd say the achievements of those in this room against the monopoly can only be characterized as breathtaking. Buyers are increasingly shunning the carriers and directly contracting with high-value physicians and facilities. Price transparency has gone from tinfoil hat to an executive order. PBMs are in the crosshairs. Surprise and predatory billing practices now receive much of the scrutiny they deserve due to the heroic efforts of Cynthia Fisher, Marty McCary, the FIA Group, and the late Marshall Allen. Unlike Isaiah, we have already passed through the proof of concept stage of our undertaking. Many new fires will be lit at the conference this year. Let's ensure that we leave this year's meeting prepared to stoke the fires we've already lit and to light others to serve as lamps and guideposts so that new members of the remnant can find and join us. Thank you.